I will sing a song uninfluenced by the voice of any other. I will offer thee my own pristine heart melodies. I will sing thee a song unheard by any. I have nurtured this song child myself. Now I bring it to thee for higher training. I will offer thee no intellectual, premeditated, art-disciplined song. What I will offer thee are the wild songs of my heart. I will offer thee not civilized, emotion-packed music or artfully cultivated song flowers, but wild blossoms that grow on the high hills of my soul. Before this, we went on air, I was practicing when my microphone was still working because it always hides. It's like a little demon. It hides during the sound test and only emerges when we're actually going live. But during the sound test, when it was working, I was reading other whispers that different ones, several different ones that I thought would do. All of them dealt with great difficulties in life and great tragedies in life. And I thought, enough already. Let's just sort of go in another direction because the practice of joy is the solution to everything. So I found that one, which has always been one of my favorites. In 1978 and 79, right after Swami Kriyananda wrote his autobiography, The Path, which some 30 years later he rewrote and called The New Path, essentially the same book, but this was the first publication of it. He'd been in more or less semi-seclusion for quite a few years writing that, and he'd always felt, he articulated this, that Ananda's work would really begin after he wrote that autobiography. And in those days, which was of course quite a long time ago from now, Swamiji was very carefully moving in the reality of trying to present Master's teachings outside of the organization Master had founded, which was Self-Realization Fellowship. And whereas all of us who were drawn to Swami as Master's instrument accepted his authority without question, Swami himself was moving extremely carefully. He felt that the powerful message of having been forcibly separated from Master's organization in the ashram where he expected to spend the rest of his life was a message that he couldn't afford to just ignore. He couldn't just say, oh, they don't know, I know, and just go forward. So every step of the way, for many years, Swami was always very careful. And as he put it, if Master wanted to give him, to continue to give him spiritual responsibility for others, which is what Master had told Swamiji would be his life, he said to Swami, when I speak of Master, I speak of Paramhansa Yogananda. I'm used to speaking to a home audience here, but I think you all know. Master had said to Swamiji specifically, you won't just be a teacher, you will have spiritual responsibility for people. I talk about this in the book I wrote called Light Bearer, which is about Swamiji. I published it last year. Now that a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands, it's a very big book. E-books are available and also audiobooks. I mention it every time I can because I think it's a book worth reading. But I talk in there about how Swamiji said, if Master wanted to give him a work, Swami wanted to make very certain that it was coming from Master and not coming from any latent subconscious desire on Swamiji's part of any kind. But one thing he felt it was very important to establish was his connection to Master and the fact that what he was offering to the world was what Master had given to him. So he often said that Ananda's work would really begin after The Path was published, because that was, when The Path was published in 1976, very little was known about Master beyond what was in Autobiography of a Yogi. It just nowadays, and it's to a large extent because of Swami Kriyananda's efforts and various things that happened, there's just a wealth of information coming out. And actually, right at the beginning of April, a new documentary is coming out. It's called Yogananda and the Kriya Yoga Masters. You can find a Facebook page for that already, and that's also full of wonderful new information that nobody's seen. But when Swami wrote The Path, people were really hungry to know about Master. And Swamiji's biography, 400-page plus biography, autobiography, really brought us into Master. There was a moment in time, I typed the manuscript for Swami. It was the last book he wrote before he got a computer. He's an early adapter, so he got a computer as soon as there was one. But The Path was the last one he wrote on an electric typewriter, so I typed and retyped that manuscript over and over again. I was very familiar with it, and all we had was the paper manuscript. And when he one evening, very quiet evening, Seva and I were, Seva's my Guru Bhai, and we were there, both of us with Swami, and just talking very seriously, just before the book was published. And he said, I think everything about our lives is going to change once this book is published, because we were just this tiny group of people living alone in the forest in a very idyllic, extremely intimate companionship of souls. And Swami spoke of, what Ananda has become, where for decades I've been separated from the people that I grew up with spiritually, because we've been dispersed all over the world to do this work for Master, which is our joy, but also. So Swamiji said, I feel like after The Path is published, everything's going to change. So he'd been working on this book for years, and I'd been helping him in my tiny way. I said, maybe I'll burn the manuscript. And in those days, burning a manuscript, that was it. There was no backup in the cloud. There was no cloud. And for just a moment, Swami looked absolutely horror-stricken. And then, of course, he tuned into my so-called humor. But very sweetly, he said, it doesn't belong to me, he said. It belongs to Divine Mother. He said, it's not my choice anymore. Such a beautiful answer, wasn't it? It wasn't even just don't do it, don't be silly. It was that every time any question came up, Swami always turned it, upward toward God. There was never a moment when he wasn't surrendering. I'll tell another story, which is also included in another book I wrote. This is the author talking about her books. Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, which is also available online. The audiobook on that one is free. You can get it on my website, Asha Joy. And now I'm going to stop, okay? But the story is in there. Now I have to remember the story. Oh, yes. I was talking about the fact that the first few years that I was living at Ananda, which then was Ananda Village, we never had to say Ananda Village because there was only one Ananda on the whole planet. It was that one place. It was 15 years before we had to delineate different places. 1510, okay. But I worked for Swamiji as his secretary. The word nowadays is personal assistant, except that word wasn't in vogue then. I was just his secretary. And where he lived, there was no electricity, what to speak of internet, because internet didn't exist. There was no telephone. He was on the other side of the hill, so to speak, from where the one or two phones that existed in the whole community were. And I worked in the office over there, and every afternoon at 4 o'clock, usually 5, 6, and occasionally 7 days a week, I and Seva and usually a few others would come to Swami's house at 4 o'clock. And every day I came to Swami's house at 4 o'clock, and I would bring him messages, letters. Remember letters? I would bring him letters, and I would bring him whatever messages there was, news of the community. The group of us there. Almost always, he would ask me to cook supper, and I would cook dinner for him because he was busy writing and he didn't take care of himself. Very often, I was there with others until 10, 11, sometimes much later, even at night, every day. I never made any plans. It wasn't a question of taking care of Swami being my first priority. It was the only priority. I had no interest in anything except being with him and serving him in whatever way I could during those period of years. At a certain point, he kicked me out of the nest. But at this point, that's what I did. Every single afternoon, Swami greeted us with great enthusiasm. He always called us great souls, just as the scripture reading was saying today. He would just say, "Oh, hello, great souls." And it wasn't like an affectation. It didn't even feel like an affirmation. It was just like he looked at us and he saw great souls. You kind of looked at yourself and you kind of felt a little more like a great soul because his faith in you gave each of us faith in ourselves. But the operative point I want to say here is that every time we showed up, Swami actually seemed genuinely surprised and delighted. We came every day. And it was, in fact, it was my job, so to speak. I got $50 in cash every month from Swami. He'd open his wallet and he would hand me $50. That was my salary. I lived in a trailer that was, shall I say, paid for. It cost like $125, the trailer. $150 actually, I think it was a luxury trailer. $150, no insurance, no car, no nothing. All I had to buy was food and propane, and in those days $50 did it. And if I ran out of money, somehow money came. But he paid me to do it, it was my job. And every time I showed up, he was surprised. And, it wasn't insulting, it was just that, oh, there you are. Like a bird that had just landed on the branch and he didn't really know whether it was going to come. And after a while, I began to really think about it, and I sort of asked Swami about it, because you see, Swamiji had always advised us, everything about your life belongs to God. We live by God's grace. We don't know where our lives came from. We don't even know that we're breathing. We just breathe. We have no idea when this life is going to end. It could pass away at any moment. I mean, right now we happen to be living in a time when there is this tiny invisible creature that seems to be going all over the planet trying to interrupt and conceivably end our lives. But at all times, that's the truth. We never know whether this breath is going to be the last breath. It's not within our, it's not within our portfolio. It's not in our job description to know that. We just live by God's grace. And if we want to live as God intended for us to live, we need to be always aware of that. So there's, the whole spiritual path. All religions are practices to lift our awareness to the story behind the story. The obvious story is just tootling around this planet doing what we do, but the real story is tootling, if I'm going to use that word, through eternity, on our way back to our divine home. So Swamiji suggests to us as a practice that every night before you fall asleep, give everything back to God. It's only yours. It's only on loan anyway. Starting with your life and your body itself, it's just loaned to you. It's just atoms that you've kind of gathered together and you're holding in this pattern. But at any point, poof, it just poof. And all those atoms, the binding force will just, which is the soul's commitment. Once the soul ceases to be committed, it just all dissipates. He said, why not get ahead of the curve? Why not be ready at all times for that to happen? Now, that's a lovely practice, and I've heard Swami say it many times. But back then, in the late 70s, I began to realize, and I said that to him, I discussed it with him because I was in the fortunate position to be able to ask him all my questions. And I spoke to him one day, I said, you seem genuinely surprised. And he would be genuinely surprised when he would hint that maybe I might like to cook dinner, and I expressed myself perfectly willing, and he would express surprise that I had no other plans. Like, of course I have no other plans, you know this. I didn't say it to him in exasperation. I would respond as he was responding to me. No, sir, I'd be very happy to. No, I have no other plans for tonight. I'd be happy to help you. Because, of course, I was. It was sincere. I said, it feels to me like you're always surprised. He said, oh, I am. He said, I said, I feel like you actually do what you tell us to do. Every night you give it back. And then everything that happens is a new gift. Why presume? Isn't that a wonderful attitude? Just a glorious way to be. Because what it does is it shifts our awareness from the idea that I'm in charge to the true realization that I live by God's grace. That I live at all is by God's grace, and everything that happens is by God's grace. And that doesn't mean we don't have responsibility. Swamiji worked harder with more dedication and with more conscientious determination to succeed and be excellent and to overcome all challenge and to be dynamic in the face of obstacles. It was exhausting. I remember Swami once said to me, kind of with a chuckle, he was like, because he pushed me pretty hard a lot of the time. And then he sort of said, sometimes, he said this years later, sometimes I would see in your eyes about me a look of almost desperate fatigue, is how he put it. And sometimes it was physical, but mostly it was just the desperate fatigue of constantly trying to uplift one's consciousness. Now, of course, I loved that. I loved being pushed like that. I loved being in Swami's company and always having the opportunity to have to rise to that level. But of course, and I don't know how the soul pants, I don't suppose it pants in the same way. That's just the physical body. But all of us, we long to, just crawl back into bed and pull the covers up over our head. And sometimes we get to do that. But eventually we have to come out. If not people do it for whole incarnations. They take drugs, they drink, I'll say we just lose our mental balance. We go into such a deep state of denial. We live on such a dull level that we just don't even really know what's going on around us. We just try everything because eventually we have to face who we really are. I love in the last line of what Tandava was reading, he said, we live in the presence of God right now, and all we have to do is remember that. It sounds so simple. It's fascinating to me how millions, bazillions of words can all just come down to these very, very simple phrases. We live in the presence of God right now, and all we have to do is remember it. It's been a lot of fun being sequestered, sheltered in place is the lovely phrase, rather than quarantine or lockdown or, any of the other words that they use. Being a wordsmith, I admire good wordsmithing. And shelter in place is just brilliant wordsmithing. So we're all sheltered in place, but because of all of this technology, thank God it's early Dwapara, we can talk to each other. It's very interesting to me. Swamiji has talked since the first time I've known him, because Master talked before him about the possibility of enormous disruption to society globally. So I and many of us at Ananda have been anticipating disruption for a long time. But somehow I always thought it would be an external threat, and I saw us all huddled together. And we just various places where I thought we would be huddled together. And if anything, we'd be crowded together. It never crossed my mind that we'd have to be 6 feet apart, sheltering in our own units. But at least we have this. And so it's been really totally fun, and I hope you all are enjoying it too. I'm talking, not talking, watching, listening to all my friends all over the place who are, like me, at 9 in the morning in California, 5 or 6 days a week. I come downstairs to where the camera is and I talk. And you see celebrities all over the world. They're all sitting there with their iPads balanced on a kitchen stool, and they're talking. Everybody's talking to everybody. And all my Ananda friends are talking. And Marianne Williamson is talking, and so-and-so in such-and-so place is talking. Everybody's talking. But what's really touching to me is everybody feels they have something to share that might be helpful. And it's interesting to me because reading through, which we're all doing, different things that Master said about dealing with hard times, He said, and these are just, I can't quote it verbatim, but this is exactly the sense of what he said. The solution in hard times is to serve. Give. If you start giving, and now if you start giving, a wonderful thing happens is you stop worrying about yourself. That's one thing that happens, but also it reverses the magnetism. Reverses the magnetism from, oh dear, what about me, to, oh, how can I help? And that very action begins to create the magnetic flow that creates the protective aura that makes everything come as it's supposed to come. In other words, it puts us more in tune with God. And whether it's a global pandemic, a nuclear war, the bubonic plague, economic collapse, I don't know if we'll get the bubonic plague, but we might get a lot of these other things, weird weather, storms, and whatever it is, everything that comes to us, whether it's great wealth and good fortune and worldwide celebrity and the adulation of the millions, everything that comes to us has one purpose, that it is the next step for us on the path to self-realization. Because all that the soul is ever doing through all these bazillions of incarnations is trying to remember its true nature. That we always live in the presence of God, we always live by the grace of God, and all we have to do is restore our knowing, realize. Realize is such a great word. Self-realization. It's not self-achievement, it's not self-acquisition, nothing. It's just that we have to wake up. When you realize something, it's not created in the moment that you realize it. It's something that was always there that you were blind to. And absolutely everything that happens to us, there's not a minute, there's not a second of our lives that isn't part of this extraordinary eternal pattern which has only one purpose, which is the divine beloved luring us back to our home in bliss. Shelter in place really means to shelter in the presence of God. Jesus did not speak of Divine Mother the way Master speaks of Divine Mother, but he did speak of the feminine aspect of God, and he called it the Comforter. And I love that word. I've always loved that word. The aspect of feminine and masculine, there are men and women, male and female, incarnated in the world because there are two principles that make the whole, the yin and yang, which makes the whole. So masculine and feminine are aspects of reality that balance into oneness. And the feminine, manifested, exemplified by the image of Mother, is the Comforter. I have wonderful memories of my mother, of just different moments of sorrow that were solved by just crawling into those arms. And we are all children still in our hearts, seeking that Comforter to come to us. And that's the shelter that we need to seek. And the whole process of the spiritual path can be summed up in, there can be 100, probably 1 million different sentences after that one that I just said, the whole process of the path. But speaking of what our reading was about today, is to realize that we don't have to earn that comfort. And Divine Mother is completely indifferent to how good we are at doing stuff. And also, she has a very, very short memory. Her memory, in fact, she doesn't have a memory. The human mind remembers, and we worry, and we replay, and we regret, and we judge, and we suffer, and so on like that, because we imagine that the past is still there. But it isn't. There's no time in eternity. There's only this present moment. All we ever experience is what consciousness we have now. And all of this stuff that we bring with us that we think is so important, and yes, on a certain level as we progress, we do need to understand ourselves. So I'm not going to, I can't cover every base. but it's gone. All that we have is our thoughts about it. And if we were able to realize, yeah, that wasn't the brightest thing to have done. My favorite self-forgiving phrase is, it seemed like a good idea at the time, or else I wouldn't have done it. Because I wouldn't have. I'm not a masochist. But a whole lot of what I did was rather masochistic in retrospect, or even sadistic in retrospect, even literally. But for some reason at the time it seemed like a good idea. But now I know it's not. So now that I know that God loves me anyway, why am I holding on to all of this? It doesn't even exist except in the thought that I hold it. In eternity, we see that it's all a dream. So I'm not able to just turn in a split second because this habit is very strong. But every time this habit grabs me, repudiate it. Shelter in the divine place. Divine Mother loves me. Yes, she does. And nothing you tell me can make me feel any different about it. Even if the you that's telling you is your own mind. Who is that mind to speak to me? I am a child of God and Mother loves me. And whatever comes or doesn't come, we suffer from what we get. We suffer from what we're denied because we just want to suffer. Every night, just give it all back to God. We live by His grace. We shelter in His presence. That's what's being asked of us. That's what's always being asked of us. If it gets very dramatic, well then great, because then we're going to have to put out the willpower to respond, because other responses may not be available to us. But why wait? Why wait? Sooner or later, I remember Swamiji, this beautiful satsang he gave. It was so deep. Oh my, it was so deep. And afterwards he said two things so powerful. He said, when God realization comes, you look back at all your incarnations, all millions of them, and you see that it was all just a play of light and shadow. That the only thing that was real was those moments when you touched into divinity, whether in the presence of the saint, a moment of exaltation, a moment when grace descended. He said, you look back and they're like pearls on a string. That's all you see, because that's all that really happened. We went around in circles, then we touched God. Ah, that happened. Then we went around in circles and we touched God, like that. So Swamiji said, that's all that we'll remember. And I felt, this night is one of those nights. I will remember this night. And then he said, like this, you're all going to get it right sooner or later. He said, why waste a few million years? So that's the question. Why waste another minute sheltering anywhere except in the presence of God?
Lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, who made the heavens and the earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. The Lord shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time